Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome to the Tuesday, August 19th edition of the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen. Welcome to a information-packed episode this week. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. It's good to be here with you always. So we've got a very interesting show lined up, a lot going on in the news today. If you're following along over on our Substack at obesity.news, that's all you have to type into your browser, and you can get all of the obesity medicine news as it happens into your inbox. No algorithm between you and us, and we know that the algorithms giveth and the algorithms taketh away. So that's why it's so important for you to sign up for those email alerts at obesity.news. It's completely free. About 10% of our content is behind a paywall to allow you the opportunity to support the work that we do, and to the tune of hundreds of you are now supporting the work that we do at On the Pen, which allows us to do some exciting things, including a recent get-together that we did in Washington, D.C. We did a Top Golf event that we put on a few weeks ago at the amazing event put on by the Obesity Action Coalition. Check them out if you haven't. The OAC is a amazing advocacy group in terms of what they're doing to push the narrative forward in the treatment of obesity and advocating for accessibility to medications. And so check out the OAC. But yeah, your support allows us to do that, and also allows us to do things like Obesity Week, which we did last year. I think we've started a bit of a trend. It sounds like there will be a lot of creators at Obesity Week this week, and this year, I should say. Obesity Week is about the first week in November, I believe, November 4th. But yeah, we went last year. You helped us to do that. We had to raise some money to do that. And so thank you for sending us last year. This year, we don't have to do that because so many of you have become members and are supporting the work that we do. And I just want to thank you for doing that. We'll be back again this year, reporting live. Of course, there's a lot of great information. Now, many of you may remember some of the greatest information that we got last year from Obesity Week was from Viking Therapeutics, VK2735 oral. And today there's breaking news on that pill. Now, if you followed On the Pen for any bit of time, you know that Viking tide, as we call it here at On the Pen, we coined that phrase when we first started talking about it. I think it was Sue the Dude who first said it. Viking tide is really exciting, and we got new data because it's going to be an injectable and an oral, and we got data on the oral. The oral is like every bit of exciting as people wished orforglipron from Eli Lilly is, but the data today sent this stock for Viking Therapeutics spiraling. So I want to get into why I think that is and what's causing that. But before we get into all of that, could you stop what you're doing for just 1 second and hit the thumbs up button if you're listening on YouTube and watching on YouTube? Also hit the subscribe button. That's going to help you see more of the content that we make here at On the Pen. And also, if you're listening on the podcast, just scroll down on the podcast on Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. That really helps the work that we do here. So if you maybe don't have a little bit of extra money sitting around to support the work that we do, we hate asking for things, but it supports what we do. The easiest thing that you can do is simply to hit the like and subscribe button. So this will be very, very interesting podcast that we're going to get into. Viking Therapeutics VK 2735. This is an oral formulation. Now, for those of you who are new to it, it is a GLP-1 GIP coagonist. Now, many of you, that's going to ring a bell. For those of you who follow along closely, the GLP-1 nerds, I always say, is that's what Manjaro and Zepbound is. It's GLP-1 and GIP. In fact, 5 times greater, 5 times more potent as a GIP medication than it is even a GLP-1 medication. So this is definitely the next generation. And now Viking Therapeutics has a drug in the pipeline. They're a preclinical company. So they don't have any drugs on the market, but they have several obesity candidates on the market. And their dual GIP GLP-1 coagonist is one of them. It's VK2735, but we call it Viking Tide because it's easier. But it's a dual agonist, GLP-1, GIP, like tirzepatide, and everything that we've seen on this one has led us to believe that it'll actually be more powerful than even Mounjaro and Zepbound are, and perhaps better tolerated. And the most exciting thing about this one for me is that it's going to be available in a pill and an injectable, and it's a peptide. So we got data on orforglipron over the last couple of weeks. It is a small molecule, so it's a non-peptide. Non-peptides, pharma likes them because they're harder to copy from a compounding standpoint. They're easier to manufacture. They're easier to scale out, and companies like Eli Lilly already possess the core competency in making small molecule medications. They've actually built out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure to make this, and they're holding and sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of inventory for orforglipron's launch. But the problem that I see with orforglipron and other small molecules is they're metabolized by the body very differently. That is perhaps a benefit in that they're not such a gremlin to take like Rybelsus is. There's a lot of rules with taking oral peptides because oral peptides are not as bioavailable as the injectable, and they can get destroyed by your stomach acid. That's why Novo Nordisk has invested billions of dollars into what's called the SNAC technology, snack technology, this sort of wraps semaglutide in this technology that allows it to pass through your stomach and then get absorbed by your body. So oral peptides are generally less bioavailable, but nonetheless effective in high doses. And that's what we're dealing with Viking Therapeutics VK2735. They're oral. Their highest dose in this trial was 120 milligrams daily. To give you some idea of the amount of API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, it would take to make something like that, it's a tremendous amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient. So that's always been sort of a question, and one we highlighted when we got the data last year from Obesity Week. And so with today's news, I find it very, very interesting that their stock nearly halved, nearly cut in half by the data, which to me wasn't even that bad. But let's get into it. So last year we talked about the amount of API that it was going to take to serve patients if they're going to take 120 milligrams of this per day. Let's just say right off the bat, let's steal the headline. They're probably not going to be advancing that high of a dose into phase 3 clinical trials. But check it out. They just posted some of the strongest weight loss data that we've ever seen in a GLP-1 pill in this phase 2 trial. People lost a full 12.2% average body weight in just 13 weeks. That's nearly 1% of your body weight per week, which isn't just promising. It's legitimately competitive with orals, which is something that we were hopeful for with orforglipron, but didn't quite get there. At least the new generation of orals. But Viking stock fell nearly 50% at one point. I'm not sure what it's trading at right now, but why? Why did this happen? Why did Wall Street, quote unquote, swipe left on oral Viking Tide? That's what I want to break down, because I think there's a story here that actually says a lot more about where obesity medicine is heading and who these trials are actually built to serve. So if you sort of think of phase 2 trials, clinical trials in general, but phase 2, 1 and 2 specifically, they're kind of like how I hear people describe a Tinder date, right? And you can imagine, even if you're like me, I haven't been on the dating scene since high school. I've been married to my high school sweetheart now since 2008 when we got married. And so I will never be dating again, Lord willing. And even if she left, there ain't no way I'm dating. But from what I hear with this Tinder, oftentimes you'll find an image of the person who's your prospective date, and the lighting is always perfect, very similar to how this lighting is now. How do I look? The angle is always flattering, taking the image from way up here, so you get that perfect jawline. The background is always very clean, even though if you looked outside of the frame, you might see some disturbing things. Everything is very staged to get the desired result, to present things in the best way possible. So you might see the picture and think, wow, this is the one. But then when that person actually walks into the date and you see that person for the first time, it is not as advertised. Maybe still good, right? but it's not that filtered, glowing, radiant person that you saw from the app. A fun way to sort of describe what happens in these phase 2 clinical trials. Everything in phase 2 is designed to make a drug look as good as possible. So you have very small subset of people, very carefully selected in some cases too. You see the different splits between male and female, ages. All of these things are sort of hand selected to deliver the right results in shorter timelines. They have aggressive titration schedules. They have maybe higher doses than maybe what they know that they'll end up in the real world. But the idea is you're optimizing a phase 2 trial to impress investors. You really want to get investors excited about what they are looking at so that they'll continue to look right in that direction. And so with that as sort of the backdrop of what a phase 2 trial is, you can kind of get an idea why when you go to phase 3, which is actually where you're going to submit that data, it's a larger study. You've got a lot more to prove to bring it to the real world. That's when the trials also get longer and the dosing has to usually become a little bit more conservative. We're seeing this in the Maritide trials. The GIP blocker with GLP-1, the monoclonal antibody treatment from Amgen. Side effects really start to matter more. Dropout rates really start to matter more. These are the things that tend to perk up the FDA's ears when you go to submit this thing for approval. And it's also going to determine what you can actually price this thing at in the real world. And sometimes the results, oftentimes with obesity medicine in particular, the results from a phase 3 don't look as good as they looked in phase 2. Now, we just saw this with orforglipron. Now, I get a lot of pushback from obesity doctors on this because they still wowed by orforglipron. I'm not as excited about orforglipron. The small molecule, the potential issues with the liver, I'm not a huge fan. But we saw this with orforglipron. This is Lilly's once daily oral GLP-1 small molecule non-peptide, first of its kind, to complete a phase 3 clinical trial successfully. In phase 2, it delivered up to, I believe it was 14% and change weight loss at 36 weeks, right? At 36 weeks in a phase 2 trial, but in the phase 3 Achieve-1 trial, that number dropped down to about 8% after 40 weeks when you placebo adjusted it. I believe it was 11% before placebo adjustment. The reason is that they had to slow the titration in phase 3. They had to balance side effects and tolerability to keep people in the study. They had to lower the top dose, which was 45 milligrams. They lowered the top dose down to 36. All of these things help to represent how are we actually going to keep these people on this medicine in the real world. If you enroll for a phase 2 obesity trial, just be ready to be on an absolute roller coaster because they slam you with the highest doses. They titrate you really fast and they just want to show the most insane amount of weight loss as they can. But now when we look at VK2735 and we sort of ask the same questions that we just did with orforglipron a week ago, we go, is this the person walking into the date or is this the profile picture, the finely tuned, nicely edited, well lit profile picture? Or is this the actual person walking in the door? And that's where we get to the actual data in VK2735. So let's talk about it for a minute. At the highest dose, which again was a staggering 120 milligram dose, that is a lot of API. This injectable once weekly high dose of tirzepatide is 15 milligrams. So we're talking about almost 10 times the amount of API per day than you see with tirzepatide. People lost an average of 12.2% of their body weight in 13 weeks. Like we said, that's almost a percentage a week. Nearly 80% of people on that dose, so a good majority of people on that dose, actually lost at least 10% of their body weight in that time frame. The placebo control group lost about 1.3%, which is pretty typical with these clinical trials. That's all very impressive, but this is sort of what doesn't get put into the headlines on VK2735. The dropout rates on that highest dose hit 38%. 38% of people who were on that 120 milligram just said, forget it, I'm out. Even though they were seeing weight loss, it wasn't worth the trade-off for them based upon that number. And even at the 90 milligram, which was the next step lowest, the dropout rate was at 28%. So still very high. The side effects, of course, were high. And that is what we're assuming led to this dropout rate. Nausea was at about 58% in the folks taking the actual drug and not the placebo group. But listen to this number, because this is one of the most interesting things. And we saw similar things in the orforglipron trial. 48%. So we had 58% reporting nausea in the drug group. 48% on the placebo group also reported nausea. And we're going to get into that because that's a fascinating number to me. So really only 10% more taking the actual drug reported nausea than people taking placebo. But when you see that number, 58% nausea, you go, whoa, that is a lot of people. But when you consider 48% of people who are on nothing got nausea, like how do you even extract anything meaningful out of that data? The vomiting was reported at 10% in the drug group and 8% in the placebo group. So could it be that people know enough about these GLP-1s, like they've heard about Ozempic, they've had a friend on Ozempic, and their friend was like, hey, you're really going to watch for feeling nausea because this is intense stuff. And so they just maybe go in with this preconceived idea of what it's going to be, and then they sort of have this placebo effect where they're feeling something that they're not. I don't know, but those are fascinating numbers and certainly make it hard to make hide or hair of actually what's going on with this medication. So why were so many people in the placebo group and vomiting? I think that's a big question that we have to ask in the trial design of these obesity medicines, including why is there even a placebo arm at all? That's a huge question for me in all this. Like, just think about this for a second. We have, in a world where we have tirzepatide, wouldn't it be just as good to know how much better is Viking Therapeutics VK2735 than tirzepatide? That's how these trials should be designed, because nobody really deserves to be put on a placebo for obesity medicine in an environment where we have such effective medications that people could take, and you could just compare one drug to the other instead of doing these placebo-controlled trials. But I sort of digress here. What we're sort of getting away from as I rabbit trail off is that either way, from this trial, one thing is clear: the pill might be really effective, but a lot of people don't seem to tolerate it at those high, especially at those higher doses. So what happened today is the Viking Therapeutics stock, which touched like $50 today, dropped down to the mid-20s. So like I said at the outset of the podcast today, it dropped like nearly 50%. So it makes you wonder, in phase 3, if they can't keep using the 120 milligram dose because of dropouts or toxicity, then that 12.2% number goes away really quick. And that's what we saw in the orforglipron trials as well. So the investors aren't just reacting to the 12% number, because that on the surface is really exciting data. They're reacting to what happens next. They're reacting to what happened with orforglipron. They're saying, we've been on this date before. We've swiped right on this one before. And then they walked in the door, and it was interesting. So they're reserving their right to be skeptical. I think that's what's happening in the markets. This is not an investor podcast. Of course, we're talking about all this from the patient perspective. But when we think about whether VK2735 is something to get our hopes up for, this is what we have to watch. The molecule clearly works. It's clearly effective when taken, especially in high doses. But it seems like a lot of people are tapping out early on it when they get onto that high dose. So how do you adjust the titration process in phase 3 clinical trials? How do you make sure that people stay on the drug? These are all things that people that get paid a lot more money than I do are paid to figure out. But this is also, just speaks to what pharmaceutical companies have to go through in these trials to make sure that once a medication hits the market, that it is something that we can all use, that it is something that is beneficial, that is something that is helpful, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing I want to say before we kind of move on in any of this is, if you're just joining here, hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. That's the easiest thing you can do to help promote the work that we're doing. I know there are a lot of people in here. There's over 300 people in here between all of the different platforms. And we don't usually always do this podcast live, but when we do, I like to encourage you while you're watching to just interact. And we'll take a couple questions at the end. Just put Q in front of whatever you put in the chat, and I'll try to circle back on that. So the bigger issue here, I think, is what we're going to have to see in phase 3 with VK2735. And again, this is just the oral. The injectable is an animal in its own right. And that's where I get really excited, because I think what we could see with the injectable version, now log this one in your memory banks. I think we may end up seeing the injectable version of Viking Therapeutics VK2735 coming out to be, almost from a weight loss perspective, as effective as retatrutide. Bookmark this, write it down for later. I think this is going to be a really big one from Viking Therapeutics. But today we're talking about the oral. That's the data that we got. And just another, point that I'd like to reiterate again, because I don't think it can be said enough. And that's where I really appreciate the organizations like the Obesity Society, the Obesity Action Coalition. They are actually actively working to improve this. But in an era where there are drugs like Zepbound and Wegovy on the market, like effective, excellent treatments exist, to compare these new drugs coming on the scene to these older drugs like Zepbound, this isn't science anymore when we make people jump on a placebo in these trials. It's cruel. It's really cruel, because people ought not have to go for months on end in the phase 3 trials, over a year, with nothing in terms of treatment for their chronic disease, in terms of medicine. So it's time to change these obesity trials from placebo-controlled to head-to-head trials. Put head-to-head in the comments if you agree with what I'm saying here. We need to 86 these placebo-controlled trials, because people deserve better in a world where we have better options. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Viking Therapeutics VK2735 oral, still, I'm super excited about it. But to me, the bigger question just looms the more this data comes out, is how fair is this to people on placebo? I don't think it's super fair. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Curious what your thoughts are on that. Want to just pause, take a breath, and thank you all again for being here on this live stream here. If you're enjoying the podcast, please give it a 5-star rating and a review to help what we're doing here. But I want to thank our partners at Row. Row is the company that I use for obesity care, and they are a company that is definitely worth checking out. You can check them out at row.co/OTP. It just tells them you came from the podcast. But they have a program called the Row Body Program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupling lifestyle modifications that their doctors help them determine and connecting them to appropriately prescribed GLP-1 medications. You can get the Row vials directly through Lilly Direct, directly through Row via Lilly Direct. You never even have to leave their app. It just comes to your door. Same with NovoCare and Wegovy. You're able to get Wegovy, the cash pay Wegovy, directly through the Row platform. So definitely check that out. And that sort of bleeds into the next conversation. But before we jump into that, I just want to say, if you're ever going to start a new medication, it's super important that you just familiarize yourself with what some of the potential side effects of starting that medication are. And you can do all of that at row.co/OTP within a couple of clicks. You can get all the important safety information that goes along with that. And I would encourage that you do that. As a shout out here, I see Lewis in the comments said, more competition equals lower prices. 100%. That is reason alone to get excited about something like VK2735. Is just the additional competition to see lower the prices. Now, on the topic of lower prices, we did get some news yesterday that Novo Nordisk is actually bringing cash pay Ozempic to their NovoCare platform. So GoodRx partnered with them. GoodRx is a leading platform for medication savings in the U.S., sort of outside insurance. And they announced that they're collaborating with Novo on all strengths of Ozempic and Wegovy pens to make them available to self-pay patients for $499 a month. That's the cash pay, no insurance, through GoodRx, effective yesterday. And the collaboration, according to them, significantly lowers the price available on GoodRx for two of the most in-demand GLP-1 medications nationwide. I'm reading from their press release, expanding access for those who lack adequate insurance coverage, as long as you're independently wealthy, because $499 a month is still extremely expensive. Yesterday also marks the first time Ozempic has been made available to patients at the self-pay price. That was really the headline in terms of them offering Ozempic next to Wegovy. Now, I'm not sure how big of a news this is, to be totally honest with you, because I do believe that the insurance uptake rate for Ozempic is around 80%, maybe even higher for Ozempic. So 80% of people with coverage have coverage for Ozempic. I'm not sure that we have the same issue with accessibility on that as we do with Wegovy, but I know that a lot of people are going to be like, hey, I'd really like to have that adjustable pen. Well, two pieces of news there. So back in February, Novo actually applied to have Wegovy be able to be manufactured in the adjustable pen from Novo Nordisk. So we should see Wegovy eventually in that adjustable pen like Ozempic, similar to the way we saw Lilly release the vials to release one pen per month instead of 4 is going to be better for the environment, better for manufacturing, and better for patients who can work with their doctors to adjust the dose on that. Because I know one of the big arguments for personalized medication and compounded semaglutide right now is that semaglutide can be so harsh for people that even jumping up at the steps that they have outlined in their information pamphlet can be too much. So having patients have that ability, I think, is a really big deal. Now, will you be able to just switch your Wegovy prescription to Ozempic? Well, you're going to have to tell GoodRx that you essentially are diabetic to get it. So take that for what it's worth. But what is some of the fine print on this Ozempic GoodRx thing? So this is a cash coupon. It's not a savings card. So if you're uninsured or paying out of pocket, it could lower the price you pay, but it's not a discount that works with insurance. It works instead of insurance. So I know that was always a huge question that people had with Lilly Direct is, can I use my savings card when I go get the vials? No. Same thing with the cash pay Wegovy and Ozempic. This is a cash coupon. It works. It's a discount that works instead of insurance, not with insurance. So there's no insurance involved here. You can't have Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, VA benefits, or any government and funded insurance. You are going to attest to that when you sign up for the card. So that includes folks who have dual eligibility. So even if you use commercial insurance and Medicare, you're still disqualified, which is why the most favored nations policy that's going on with the Trump administration and Big Pharma right now is so important. This global equalization, because that will ultimately, what it's designed to do is drive down the cost of these medications for Medicare and Medicaid so that they can expand accessibility. Because due to old archaic laws that I'm sure are rooted in helping to protect the consumer, patients living on Medicare get boxed out of these medications because they don't qualify for the savings cards. And this is another program where same deal. And the whole thing is about the government not wanting pharmaceutical companies to market drugs to seniors. But at the end of the day, we have a medication that can, we learned last week, be used in the treatment of MASH, non-alcoholic fatty liver, what it used to be known as. We have a drug that can treat heart failure. We have a drug that can, in Zepbound at least, that can treat sleep apnea. But patients are boxed out of these treatments because in order to afford them, they basically can't, without selling a kidney, because they have a very limited access and no accessibility to these savings programs. So Most Favored Nations is designed to bring the price up around the world and bring it down for Medicare. So hopefully we can expand people that are covered under Medicare and Medicaid, who are in this country some of the most left out and screwed over people when it comes to getting medicine that some may argue they could use it more than anyone, but they're still boxed out. And so that is why I remain extremely hopeful and extremely unapologetic that I want this to work. I want it to work for people because it matters to me that so many of you on Medicare are left out. You're on fixed incomes and you have the double whammy of not getting the benefit of any sort of savings program. and you need this medication. And so I'm hopeful that something happens meaningfully there, and we'll be continuing to monitor that closely. You must not submit this for reimbursement, or it could count towards your deductible. Is something, if you use this coupon for the cash pay, you agree not to try to get your insurance to reimburse you later. So you can't apply what you're paying towards your deductible or your out of pocket for insurance. That's sort of another drawback with these programs. And even if your pharmacy tries to run it as cash and you have Medicare, you're still not eligible. So trying to sneak around the rules by pretending you're uninsured is probably not going to fly and could get you in trouble. So don't try to use it, would be my recommendation. Pharmacies can call the hotline if they can't get it to work, et cetera, et cetera. More of this is, for the processing of the actual savings card. But just know that it's operated by GoodRx, but the data gets shared between them and Novo Nordisk. And also know that GoodRx has had some issues in the past with how they use the data that they collect on you. It says that the redemption data is collected, anonymized, and shared with Novo, but know that they are tracking aggregate usage through this, and know that there has been some previous issues with GoodRx and how they've handled people's data. So just be aware of that moving forward. So that's what I got for you on the new drop of the Ozempic cash pay. I think this is a exciting move for some, but I'm not entirely sure how beneficial it's going to be for how many people long term. Really, at the end of the day, it's absurd to me that Novo Nordisk has not lowered the price on Wegovy and Ozempic. I've been saying for a couple of months now that I anticipate that they will be doing that this year, because I simply don't know how they make it without lowering the price. You have a drug in Zepbound and Mounjaro that is proven to be superior. You do have some additional indications, including the MASH indication that came last week for semaglutide. But that's simply just because they've been on the market longer. I think we will see, this is just a guy's opinion, not medical advice, but I think we will see expanded labeling for Zepbound and Mounjaro over the next couple of years, similar to what we've seen with Ozempic and Wegovy. It's just a couple of years behind. Does that make sense? Want to take a moment to just thank you all for being here, and thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the comments with a Q in front of it so that I know that you're asking a question. I've got about 2 minutes here left to spend with you today, so I would be happy to take a couple questions if you have them. Maybe I know the answer, maybe I don't, but we'll see. I will invite you to watch a personal update video that I dropped on the YouTube channel yesterday, which was a long overdue personal update, but it's about as personal and raw and vulnerable as you're ever going to catch me being on a camera in front of thousands of people. But if you want to check that out, you can check that out. And also this past Friday, Mike and Jay hosted for Sabrina a Weighing What Matters, a special edition over here on the Pen YouTube channel, where they interviewed a panel of 5 medical professionals that are all on the pen, everything from a psychologist to an MD and everything in between. All of these people who treat patients living with obesity, but are also living themselves with the disease of obesity and are on the pen. So you got some really great perspective from those folks. And so I would strongly encourage you to check that out as well if you haven't already. If you have, let me know what you thought of that. Drop it in the comments. If you'd like to see more like that, we can definitely bring that to you. So thank you all for being here. If there are no questions, we will do this again next week. This podcast drops every Tuesday. Sometimes it's live like today, and sometimes it's pre-recorded. But every week it is information designed to help you have more competent and confident conversations with your doctor. If it did that for you today, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and drop a 5-star rating and review on the podcast. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen.